God's presence descends in this mountain in darkness and fire and lightning. And God says, Moses, come on up to meet with me. And Moses goes to the top of the mountain. He's up there for a long time. And God gives him the law. The first of which is the Ten Commandments, followed by 615 or 610 or so other laws that are going to govern and direct Jewish society. Everything from what they eat and how they interact with one another, their property borders, the sacrificial system, the priesthood. And one thing he gives them deep and explicit instructions on is a place called the tabernacle. God says, I want you to build this place. I want you to build this spot where all the priests are going to do their religious duties. They're going to sacrifice their animals here, and my presence will be in the back of that place. And the Ark of the Covenant, this gold box where God's manifest, his tangible presence, was going to rest in that place. So they build this tabernacle. It's a moving temple, a moving tent. They can take it down and set it up. Moses lives and dies. He leads the people through 40 years of wandering in Egypt. Wandering in the wilderness, and they keep sinning. In fact, that whole generation, other than two guys, other than Joshua and Caleb, everybody who left Egypt that was over 20 years old, they died in the wilderness. It was only Joshua and Caleb, because they obeyed God. It's a separate story, who actually were able to go into the new place. So God says, hey, I got this land set apart for you guys. It's a promised land. It's going to be a land flowing milk and honey. Moses, my servant, is dead. Speaking to Joshua, therefore the time has come for you, Joshua, lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I'm giving them. In 3 days you will cross the Jordan River and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. So what begins from there in the book of Joshua is the conquest of that land. Joshua takes those 12 tribes, remember 12 tribes, he divvies them up and says, this land is yours, and they parcel it out and say, each of you guys have to go and take the land from those people inhabiting that place. Some of them are very successful, and they go and they overthrow and they set up their domain, and others they fail. And so we've got this. What happens now for the rest of biblical history is these other gods, these other pagan people, because they weren't thoroughly defeated, they're still influencing the lives of the Israelites. After Joshua, he eventually dies. He's the first of the judges. After he dies, there's no real formal power structure. Instead, it's the hope was that the people would put their hope in God. He would be their leader. But what would happen is people would see the other neighbors, and they would start worshiping their gods. And they would fall into slavery and bondage, and God would give them over to be the slaves of the other tribes. It happens like 10 or 11 or 12 times. I don't know for sure, but and every time that happens, God says, when they cry out to him, say, God, we've sinned against you, come and help us. He raises up a person that we call them a judge. They were kind of like a military/political leader, not so much religious, but they were like a military political leader, not what we think of as a judge. And that judge would lead the people in battle and overthrow their captors, and they would have another period of life. Then again, it would happen. And over and over, this cycle would happen. And the closing word on the book of Judges is this. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. They did what seemed right in their own eyes. God help us. Last of the judges is a guy named Samuel. He's a prophet. You can read the story of what happened to him. But while he is the judge and the prophet, they go to Samuel and say, Samuel, all the other nations around us, they have kings. How come we can't have a king? And Samuel warns them, hey guys, if you have a king, he's going to oppress you. He's going to tax you. He's going to take your sons, put them into the military. He's going to take your daughters and bring them into his household. You don't want a king. And they said, well, Samuel, we don't care what you say. We want a king. Give us a king. And God says to Samuel, because Samuel's so dejected, he says, Samuel, don't worry. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. I'll give them a king, and we'll see what happens. So Saul, the first king of Israel, he's given the kingdom at their demand. He is appointed. He's this tall, good-looking hunk of a guy, 6 foot something, and he's got this strong armor. And people think that's surely the guy who's going to lead us. And truly, he gets anointed. He gets installed as king. A few years go by, and God gives him an assignment. Hey, he says, Saul, I want you to go wipe out the Amalekites. I want you to take them. This is a people group that didn't get wiped out during the conquest. He says, go take care of them. And I want you to take care of everybody. I don't want you to save a single thing. So they go to battle. They go to war, and they defeat the Amalekites soundly. But Saul, instead of obeying the instruction, he actually takes some of the cattle. And he takes the king, and he preserves some because he wants a little bit of glory for himself. And Samuel goes to Saul. He says, Saul, because you disobeyed God, the kingdom has been taken from you, and it will be given to another. Now, during that time, there's battle with the Philistines, and there's this young man named David who's out in the fields worshiping God, enjoying God, and he has fought the lion and the bear, and he finds out that this Philistine army is attacking his people. And then he finds out there's this giant who is opposing God's people, and nobody will fight him. So David goes to King Saul and says, hey, let me go and fight him. Like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he dares to defy the armies of the living God? David is victorious, kills the giant. Everybody starts saying, Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his tens of thousands. Saul is this jealous guy, and this jealousy starts building inside of him that now shades the whole rest of his kingdom. David is anointed as king. Samuel the prophet goes to David, or goes to his family, and the family, I'm on this side today. He's got 7 sons, and, David's father has 7 sons. And so the 7 sons all get lined up because Samuel shows up at the door and says, hey, his name is Jesse. Jesse, one of your kids is going to be king. And so Jesse gets all of his kids lined up, and he goes one by one. And Samuel says, no, this isn't. Got anybody else? He says, yeah, well, there's a little puny David. He's out in the field. And he goes, and actually this happened before the giant, so forgive me there. But he says, he takes David and anoints him as king. Anointing meaning you're promising, you're declaring this guy will be king. It's not actually making him king, it's saying that you're going to be king. He's anointed as king. Later on, Saul dies in battle. David's a little bit older, and he is now inaugurated as a king. A few years into his reign, he takes the people, and they go and they fight at a city named Jebus. They overthrow the Jebusites. They overthrow that city. That city is renamed Jerusalem. They come and they set up their capital, David's kingdom, at the city of Jerusalem. David rules and reigns, has a bloody kingdom, but a very successful kingdom. He, at the end of his life, says, God, you have given me this amazing, beautiful kingdom. I have this palace. I live in a palace, but you're still living in a tabernacle. You're still living in this mobile tent. Will you please let me build you a temple to worship you so it'll be a glorious temple? And God says, David, I appreciate the offer, but you've shed too much blood. Instead, your son Solomon, he's going to build that temple. So David eventually dies. His son Solomon becomes the next king. Solomon, who wrote Psalms and Proverbs. You see, we're almost through. We're getting there. Right? So, hold your good. Oh, we'll be fine. Okay. 12:30 minutes. So, that was a big joke. I'm sorry. Okay. So, Solomon builds this temple. It takes years and years. It is the most glorious structure probably in human history up until that point. All this gold and gems and fine linen. It's this magnificent structure. And on the day when it's finally complete, Solomon has this massive ceremony where they sacrifice like 22,000 cattle and like 120,000 sheep. All the people are gathered together, and the presence of God comes and descends, and it fills this place. And God says to Solomon, hey Solomon, if you will love me and serve me and worship me, you will always have a descendant on your throne. Solomon promises to do that. However, very quickly, things start changing with Solomon. He ends up, at the end of his life, having had 300 wives and 700 concubines. This guy was a glutton for every form of sin and wickedness, and yet at the same time, God blessed him with wisdom and forgiveness and repentance. And it's a complicated story. A lot of stuff in the Bible, it's complicated. It doesn't fit a nice, perfect story. But that's what happened. It's an honest retelling. Solomon builds the temple. The temple is dedicated. He has this vast, wealthy kingdom. It's a time of peace. There's peace throughout the land. David had lots of wars. Solomon's kingdom is full of peace. People even from far distant lands. The Queen of Sheba comes and says, Solomon, I've heard about your wisdom. Please tell me. And she brings him these gifts, and he shares with her the wisdom that he has. And she says, I had heard it from a distance with my own, but now I've heard it with my own ears, and you're right. Surely the presence of God is here. So Solomon dies, and this is probably one of the saddest parts of history, Jewish history, is when he dies, he has a son named Rehoboam. He's going to be king. Rehoboam is a young man, probably roughly about 20 or so. It says in the Bible, I don't know, but he's a young man, and he's offered the kingdom. When it comes time for him to leave, he asks the people, he asks his advisors, hey, how should I rule? And they said, hey, go tell your people that my father was tough, but I'm going to give you guys a break, and we're going to have a really nice time. He rejects that advice. He goes to his peers and says, what should I do? He said, tell them that my father used whips, but I will use scorpions. My little finger will be as big as my father's waist. In other words, I'm going to make it tough for you guys. I'm going to make it even tougher, and you're going to serve me, and we're going to have a rigid kingdom. I'm going to rule with an iron fist. Well, remember those 12 tribes? 10 of those 12 tribes say, down with the son of David. no son of David is going to rule over us. So those 10 tribes, they reject Rehoboam. They said, we're done with you. And they form their own separate kingdom. They move their capital up to a city called Samaria. They install their king, which I don't know why this is named. His name is Jeroboam, which is really close to Rehoboam. The way I remember it is Solomon was an S, Rehoboam was an R, really close in the alphabet. That's how I remember it. So in Israel, so the land now is split. And the north country is called Israel. From this point forward, that's called Israel. Up until this point, it was all Israel. But now in the north is Israel, in the south is Judah. Those are the names of those territories. So from here begins the books of Kings. And if you've seen the Bible, you've seen the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. And we now have this parallel track. We've got a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom, and they each have their own kingdoms, their own stories. And we'll see as you read that some of them are, so as the kings go, some of those kings do a good job, and they worship God, and they lead an upright kingdom, and others give themselves over to idolatry. In fact, in Israel, that idolatry becomes very prominent pretty quickly. And God sends these prophets. Now, guys, we're already in the prophets. We're almost through with the Old Testament, all right? So, God sends prophets, and he tells them, so let me give you a couple examples. So take Hosea, for example. The Lord gave this message to Hosea, son of Beri, during the years when Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah were kings of Judah, and Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, was king of Israel. What do you see there? Well, you notice that Hosea has been given messages from God, and we see two kingdoms in there. We see Judah, and we see Israel. That's what's happening. So this tells us that this happened after 922 BC, in this period when the kingdoms were split. Another one. This message was given to Amos, a shepherd from the town of Tekoa in Judah. He received this message in visions 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was king of Judah and Jeroboam II, the son of Jehoash, was king of Israel. Again, Amos, and he's prophesying during that time when the kingdoms are both still standing. But as time would happen, the prophets, the prophetic warnings were rejected. These people continued on in their sin. And Assyria, this rising, vicious empire, comes and they attack Samaria. They destroy it. They take all the people, they kill them, they sell them in slavery, they send them off into exile. The kingdom of Israel, capital in Samaria, is no more. It's gone. Those people never quite make their way back. They actually were going to go and conquer Jerusalem. Right as they get to the city gates, God intervenes. He says, no, that's not going to happen at this point. So Assyria defeats Samaria, defeats the north kingdom. Remaining is the south kingdom, Judah, Jerusalem. And they go on for another about 150 years. Same thing happens. They fall into idolatry and wickedness. And there's a couple good kings that draw them back towards the things of God, but they keep falling into this wickedness. Again, God sends them these prophetic warnings saying, stop, turn from your sin, don't do this. Now, you guys have heard that God in the Old Testament is a God of wrath and judgment and anger. That's not true. Right? God is consistent throughout all the Bible, from beginning to end. He is a consistent God. He doesn't change. The fact that we even have these prophetic messages is God's example of his grace, saying, guys, I'm warning you. Judgment is coming, but if you turn back, even now, I will have mercy on you. Even now, I will forgive you. And even said the same message to some of you. Even now, no matter where you've been, I will have mercy on you. But there is a day when the mercy of God does come to an end. A couple examples of these prophets. Isaiah. These are the visions that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. He saw these visions during the years when Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah were kings of Judah. Notice that there's no Israel. Why? Because this happened after that. Israel is gone. It's just the southern kingdom. Jeremiah. These are the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests from the town of Anathoth in the land of Benjamin. The Lord gave message to Jeremiah during the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah, the southern kingdom. About 600 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians, Babylon, they come and they besiege Jerusalem. It's a 10, 15, 20-year siege of the city. And eventually, 586 BC, the southern kingdom falls to Babylon. And fortunately, unlike the Assyrians, they didn't slaughter absolutely everybody. They killed a lot of people, but instead they took those people and they sent them into exile far across the Middle East into the land of Babylon, which is now the Persian area. They get sent to Babylon, and they're going to have 70 years of captivity. Jeremiah has this in the book of Lamentations. He has this long poetic lament of how he has seen the tragedy of his people. After 70 years, God raises up a king. So we have the Babylonian Empire. They're overthrown by the Medes and the Persians, and then eventually the Greeks, and we get into more modern Greek and Roman history, but we're not there yet. God raises up a king named Cyrus. He is not a believing king. He is not a godly man necessarily, but God still uses him, and he gives them the blessing. And Cyrus gives to the people, he says, go back to your land and rebuild. I will fund it. So this pagan king funds the people to go back to their own land and rebuild the temple. So we have Ezra, the book of Ezra, Nehemiah. Ezra is a priest at this time. He goes back. Now, when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, they destroyed the temple. This beautiful temple that Solomon had built, it gets completely destroyed. Ezra goes back and they rebuild the temple. But there were still some people who remember the old temple from decades ago, and when they saw it built, they wept because it was just a shell of its former glory. Nevertheless, they have reestablished their temple. Nehemiah comes a few years later, and he brings another group of exiles back from Babylon to Jerusalem, and they rebuild the walls around the city. That's what the book of Nehemiah is about. And that's the end. That is the end of the saga of the Old Testament. From Abraham all the way through Nehemiah, then there begins this period of silence. We're talking about 500 BC right now. Think at the end. Review real quick. Missed I blew my cover. Go back. All right, review real quick. We're going to go to the eight major events. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Going to slavery. 500 years after Abraham comes a guy named Moses. He leads the people out. Moses, he dies. Joshua. Then the judges come and they take over. They run. The kingdom is given to Saul. He loses the kingdom. It's given to David. David gives his kingdom to Solomon. Solomon's son Rehoboam takes over. There's a division. The kingdom splits. 922 BC. The kingdom, north kingdom, Israel. Southern kingdom, Judah. They live for a while. Idolatry and wickedness comes in. In 722 BC, the Assyrians besiege Samaria. They destroy it, overthrow it. About 150 years later, the Babylonians come and they destroy Jerusalem. They're in exile for about 70 years. They come back from the exile. All right, everybody, stand up. Oh, really? Stand up. Stand up. All right, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Stretch your legs, say hi to somebody around you. And I need about another 10 minutes. Okay? Ready to go.
Dan?
Yes.
Maybe we could say happy birthday to Rick.
That would be a great night on a mission. It's Rick's birthday, everybody. Everybody have a seat. Hey, did the keys work? It's 44. Are we on? Check. Am I on? They return from exile after these 70 or so years. There's a sequence of returnings. And then we've got a couple prophets later on, Joel and Malachi, who wrote later on, but that's really the end of the narrative. There's not a whole lot more story there. Now, there's a lot of story outside of the Bible that you can find from those 500 years. But, guys, take a deep breath. Smile. Because 500 years later, in this land, this place, these people that God has called out, in the city of Jerusalem, from Abraham is born Christ the Lord, Christ the Messiah. Remember what he said to Abraham. Abraham, I'm calling you out of your people. I will make for you a nation as great. You will be the father of many nations. And from you, all peoples of the earth will be blessed. What was he talking about? He wasn't talking just about the Jewish contribution to society. He was talking about it coming from the Jewish people. All the revelation of God would come through the Jewish people, eventually Jesus. Born to us today in the city of David, Jerusalem. That's Bethlehem. Is born, Christ the Lord. Now, Jesus would grow up, and he would, probably apprentice with his father as a carpenter. He would go and he would teach in the synagogues, and they would marvel, who is this young 13-year-old lad who has such wisdom? And they go and look for him, and because he's lost, and his parents find him finally. He says, guys, didn't you know I'd be in my father's house? He gets inaugurated into his ministry by being baptized by John the Baptist, and then he gets led out into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit, where he is tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, and Satan tempts him to bow down and worship him and give him the kings of the world. And Jesus says, no, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, serve only him. What's he quoting from? He's quoting from the book of Deuteronomy that Moses wrote, and it came from the content when Moses was up on top of Mount Sinai. He is quoting from the law of God. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. It is written, you shall not test the Lord your God. All quotes from the book of Deuteronomy, from the law of Moses. He would, of course, heal people. He would minister to those who were outcasts, who were lepers. He would look like that. Those greedy eyes. He would be sentenced unjustly. They would try him, they would capture him, they would take him in the middle of the night, they would try him in an illegal and a rushed trial. They would sentence him to be whipped and beaten with a crown of thorns on his head. Pilate would bring him up before the people, and he says, who would you like me to let go? This man Jesus? They said, no, crucify him, give to us Barabbas, the murderer, the no murderer. And they said, crucify him. They beat him. Carries his cross. And he's crucified. In this the love of God is made known. In this the love of God is manifested. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. What happened at the cross was God's intention. It was his plan. There was no accident there. Jesus did not get taken off guard. He surrendered himself willingly to these people, and God directed the affairs in the hearts of men that they would crucify him. From Abraham, even before Abraham, we could go back further to Genesis 1. We start with Abraham. From Abraham all the way up through the cross and then through the resurrection, God's plan for our redemption, for the blessing of the world, was that his son would be crucified, he would rise from the dead, and he would create from that people, or from that effect, a new people, the church, the people of God. Remember where we started? Romans, the line of Israel. He says, you guys were Abraham, he was the starter of this, and from him, these branches from this wild olive tree, you guys were these branches that were grafted in. There may be some people here of Jewish history, but I am not. I don't get to participate in the blessing of Abraham, but because of what Jesus has done, all of us who belong to Jesus, we are woven together. We are grafted in to this history. So as much as you may have some personal family history or some American history, the truth is, this is your history. Abraham is your patriarch. David is the greatest king in your history. The prophets spoke to you and to your ancestors.